are we building tools that make our reps faster or just faster sounding, right? So Claude, Chat are great. And it's one of those things, yeah, that they do produce some pretty quality responses, but using your dad as an example, the more and more he uses that model, the more personalized and potentially the more skewed that model will become, right? So there is a balancing act too on how holistic you want the responses to be, how insightful you want the responses to be based on that given situation too.
Welcome to Agile Talks. I'm all-time quarterback host. I'm just going to keep using that. It's going to be a joke I'm going to beat into the ground. Sitting here with 3D Agility CEO Mark Beatty. Mark, how are you doing today? That's a lovely shirt.
I appreciate it. I'm doing great. How's your summer going?
Again, every week we're going to do the same thing. You're going to pretend like I don't talk to you during the week. My summer's great. I was just telling you, I have a super excited, going to have a third child. I'm not going through any hard labor, but third child in like 6 weeks. Yeah. So super excited for that. Totally finished his room. It's done. He totally has carpet in there right now. All right. So today let's talk about, I'm rude. How's your summer going?
It was a great week. Yeah, we had some awesome developments for the business this week. So really exciting stuff.
I was more referring to like, did you go to the pool? But yeah, whatever.
Personally, my summer is spent on baseball fields. That's how I spend my summer. My son is into travel baseball, so for all the listeners out there that their kids do that, they can totally appreciate what their summers look like. We do a lot of wintering vacation now. So the off season, it's like, 80 years old, we've officially become snowbirds, at 45.
It's exactly, I'm sure that's exactly what your wife wanted to hear. It's not bad. Would I rather go to like Tahiti in January versus July? Probably.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
Let's talk about today's episode, which is you and I, because we talked about this before, think sales reps or sales teams are drowning in systems and not data. So you've seen this firsthand working at a major corporation that over time, I'm sure they just layered on system and system and system, thinking it was going to help the sales team be better and better and better. And your previous company is not unique to that. It's across the board. And what usually happens is the sales team gets more and more and more frustrated because everything seems to get harder and they're getting yelled at for not using all of the tools the companies are paying for. So before we do anything else, can you at least give me a little insight into what this is like firsthand dealing with sales teams who you are forcing just another system onto?
I think there will be a lot that we can discuss about this, but I think the perception, or you probably even heard it, is like the Rolodex. Let me check the Rolodex, or when I carried the bag, things like that. Some of it is nostalgia. And there's not really a lot of evidence to back it up. I think if you're honest, you take an honest assessment of what your sales team looked like, 20 or 25 years ago versus what they look like today. The old days weren't necessarily faster. I would argue the complexity was way less. So the sales reps of the past maybe carried a way smaller catalog. Right. What they needed to know was, a much smaller scale. The pricing was probably way more static than it is dynamic now. So I'd argue some of that is just the complexity of what sales professionals have to sell today is very different than what it was. And that's due to acquisitions. That's due to companies getting larger. There's a whole host of reasons on why that complexity exists. But that's the first thing that we should probably double click on and say, okay, are we really comparing apples to apples of how we used to sell versus how we sell today? And with that comes a whole question around data and how do we structure the systems around it to make it easier.
No, I think that's a fair thing to say, right? I always think of my dad, right, who's a sales rep, his entire career. And I remember like walking into his desk. He didn't have a Rolodex, but if you know my dad, that's not surprising. He is the I got paper all over my desk type of person. And once a month,
probably notebooks like everywhere.
Notebooks. I got paper everywhere. He's the I'm going to print something out, write on it, and then scan it back in type of person. But he would just have a giant, he would just have a giant stack of business cards with rubber band around it. To this day, he still does that sometimes. And so I will agree with you that it's not nearly as complex probably as it is today. Would you at least concede the fact that maybe all of the ways to make things less complex don't pan out in the way that people imagine they do from a sales leadership aspect? Like, hey, we're going to give you all these tools and they're not as easy to use as people want to.
I think that is very much the truth. And I think sometimes we look at systems as being kind of that magic bean, right? Of, hey, we know we have maybe a long learning curve, or maybe the complexity of our business has expanded. How do we start replicating a rep that has 12 years into a rep that has 2? And some of that is, if tenure is really the magic equation to your search engine, right? You need to be here a long time in order to be successful. That is a perfect opportunity to say, okay, what makes our data set searchable? How do people learn? How do people find things? If the only way to find things is you've been here 10 years and like you got to take this turn plus this turn and double click here, and then the ultimate answer is filed in the basement somewhere, that should be a red flag. So one of the biggest questions that a corporation or a business can use is if our top performer left tomorrow, what would break? And then ultimately, is that a people problem or a system problem? And that is the $1 million question, right? Is that individual just an absolute superstar, or does it give us pause to say, actually, there may be some system challenges here, and then start asking more questions. How do we go about fixing it?
Yeah, I think it is a fair assessment, because, if your best person left and they either know like one of two, like actually let's look at 2 of your team members. Okay. So if your best person left, I'm complimenting Bob here. Like Bob's really, really talented. But I know, talking to Bob had put in a bunch of fixes to like find things. So like Bob understood how to query things within a certain system that he existed in. And like there's lots of Bobs all over the world where maybe Bob doesn't know everything from like in the back of his head type of thing, but he at least knows how to go find it very efficiently, because your system maybe is way too complicated. So Bob leaves, everything becomes difficult. Or not difficult, no clue on that actual situation. But like, I just knew Bob knew how to look for stuff because I've talked to him about it. And that becomes complicated when any person leaves, if they have that level of knowledge. And then the other aspect of it is the systems that are put in place are way more complicated today than maybe they were. Where Joe, I remember him saying that when he was hired in the 1930s, so when Joe was hired probably in the 80s or 90s, they didn't have a computer system to look up parts. So his first job was answering customer queries. And he literally said that he sat at a desk with a stack of binders with all the parts. And if a customer had a question or was interested in the product, Joe would open the book and go like, all right, let me look. And this was just accepted. He couldn't get them an answer within 30 seconds, but at least he had a very linear path to get them an answer,
Yep.
which I don't think reps or customer service people feel like today. And why you probably hear people feel nostalgic about, well, it was so much easier when I just had a book because at least I had a pathway to get to the answer. Now I don't know if I'll ever be able to get to an answer.
I think that totally reiterates, though, that first point, Ryan, is the complexity of what that customer service or that salesperson is responsible for. In that situation, I've not had that conversation with Joe, but I'll definitely ask. He was probably only responsible for, a subsection of lines. Maybe it was only power, or maybe it was only signal, or maybe it was only terminal and splices. It was a subsegment of everything else. And you had essentially specialists across your product line that really, really knew that industry, that product catalog well. That's very different now. Now a customer service person or salesperson, typically, depending on the size of the business, is responsible for the entire catalog, which is different technologies, way different product lines. So that leads into a conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago where, a fast wrong answer is worse than a slow right answer. And saying, I don't know, and I'll look into it is legitimate. And it should be something to really consider when you don't know and you need more time. But then it's this balancing act of, well, how do we actually empower our teams to have the right answer faster and not have to do that turn back, right? Because even when you say, I don't know and I need more time, there's still a window, right? There's still a window that a customer or a client will wait patiently for a response. If that turns into days or weeks before they actually get a response, I hate to break it to you, they're already looking at other solutions where they can find the answer. So it is this balance of how much are you responsible for and speed.
So with the idea of giving your reps the ability to answer faster, I think that's always been everyone's focus with any of the tools, with the ERP improvements, with the query tools that people put together, whether they're custom or out of the box, with the literally anything, right? It's how can we make our sales team faster at getting quotes out the door and answering people's questions. I think the ideal situation is, why do the older people, my dad included, or you're not that old, but like, why do you struggle with tools? Because you have to remember 15 steps to find an answer. So I think when we look at like, what should a team be looking for when trying to find new technology to adopt, and why ChatGPT or Claude or any of those groups get so much, so their adoption was so quick, is because it is so easy to use, right? You're literally asking a question. Okay. That's, my dad, like, I don't know why he uses it for stuff. I'm just talking about my dad a lot today. I don't know why my dad uses it to like ask what the weather is going to be in like South Carolina in 3.5 weeks. But he does, because it's easy for him to just go into, in his mind, it's easier to go into Claude and go, what's the weather going to be like in 3.5 weeks in South Carolina, than go actually look at a forecast, which I think is interesting, because if someone could lay a Claude-like system on top of a complicated database, Peregrine, you would be able to theoretically find those answers relatively quickly compared to looking through 5 or 6 different systems to try to find that answer, which I assume was your motivation behind developing Peregrine.
For sure. And I think that, again, to provide a little bit of reflection, because there are tools out there, a little bit of reflection saying, okay, are we building tools that make our reps faster, or just faster sounding, right? So Claude, Chat are great, and it's one of those things, that they do produce some pretty quality responses. But using your dad as an example, the more and more he uses that model, the more personalized and potentially the more skewed that model will become, right? So there is a balancing act too on how holistic you want the responses to be, how insightful you want the responses to be based on that given situation too. So there is trade-offs. I think Peregrine, yes, that is our idea. Just knowing what Bob has gone through as a field application engineer, what Joe has gone through as an engineer, what I have seen from a commercial lens, there is an opportunity to provide data and insights in a much more approachable way. And search engines, when you're kind of the outside looking in, that is the common practice right now. Engineers will search Google, or they're starting to lean on Claude and some of the models more often. But again, even those responses aren't necessarily based on your data or clean data, right? It's whatever it's finding. So we do believe that there is an opportunity to kind of look at tools in a different way that position kind of not just faster answers, but better answers. And that should be the ultimate litmus test, is not are we just able to search the catalog faster? What type of responses are we getting? How do you action those responses? And are they actually resulting in new business? Too many times we just try to surface kind of doing it faster and more efficient, but we're not tying it back to the business. We're not tying it back to a dollar, a hardcore dollar figure. And that's where we think we're still very uniquely positioned to do for a lot of our clients and a lot of our customers.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment to make, because I've tried to propose enough software being bought in my life that I know that whoever is going to approve it is going to ask the question of like, well, how is this going to either, one, you get two things. How is this going to help us eliminate people, right? Or how is this going to help us increase top line revenue, right? And if you can't draw an exact line to either of those, and it gets squiggly in between, it becomes harder and harder to justify what you're doing. And I'd also say it's a good litmus test of like, if you can't draw a direct line into how it's going to get from point A to point B for either eliminating or adding, it probably is going to struggle from an adoption standpoint as well, because it's fuzzy in between. So I think we leave on that, right? If you're a group looking at software, if you're listening to this and you're frustrated by your team's adoption of software, maybe be self-reflective and ask, is it making it easier? Did you make it more complex? Why are they struggling with it? Are you adding top line revenue? I've always felt that sales reps will adopt things and use things if it helps them sell more, because most of them are commission based, and nothing motivates people more than money.
If you can get to the heart, if you can get to the heart of why they show up, and you can draw that line, to your point, around revenue, ultimately commissions for your sales team, you will have adoption 100%. If you help them sell more, that is a very easy scenario. If they don't understand how this tool or how this system actually positions them to win more, that adoption is going to be very hard.
Agreed. Well, you have a great rest of the day, even though I'm going to talk to you in a couple seconds.
Yeah, do the same. Let's run it back. Have a great day.